You mix up some watercolour paint and in no time it's separated on your palette. It happens to me too all the time, so don't worry about it. Today I'm going to show you how to minimize that while I demonstrate how I painted different sections of this little baby wallaby. I think it's a baby wallaby. It could be a little kangaroo. I'm sure someone who knows will correct me if I'm wrong. We're lucky enough to live on 25 acres. We've got lots of room between us and the neighbours. And as an added bonus, we're surrounded by state forest. And because we're surrounded by the forest, we get lots of birds and other animals visiting our garden. One of my favourite things to do to relax is to sit here in this hanging chair and watch all of the birds and animals. So this little baby wallaby that I painted is one of the visitors in our garden. I painted him using a wet on wet technique to get the texture on the fur, and then when that was dry I glazed over some transparent washes just to boost and change the colour slightly. Now before I show you my technique, let's have a quick look at how I mixed up the paint. Now the first thing I have to do is just mix up some grey. I like to use French Ultramarine and burnt sienna to mix my grey. Now I don't mix a lot of colours, but I do tend to use this combination of burnt sienna and French Ultramarine in nearly all of my paintings. Now I know Daniel Smith make a pre-mixed grey called Jane's Grey, which is a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, but I just prefer to mix my own. Now I've got the French Ultramarine there and I'm just adding in the burnt sienna now. If you're curious about this palette that I'm using, I have a video here on YouTube where I show you it in more detail and I tell you where I got it from and why I like it so much. After the mixed puddle of paint has been sitting there on my palette for a little while, the paint will start to separate, and you can see it starting to separate here, and I haven't even used it yet. When it does that, I pick it up with my brush and I put it on my paper and I'll get slightly different variations of grey. So I'll show you that. Now I've been using the paint for a little while and you can see that the colours have separated. So by picking the paint up just here in this section, that's the colour I get. But if I pick the paint up over here where the burnt sienna has accumulated, I get a warmer grey. Over here, it could be a slightly different colour again. So if it bothers me, what I'll do is I'll just give it a quick stir, just with my brush, and that just combines the colours again. It can be a little frustrating, but I don't mix a lot of paint, so it doesn't really bother me. In fact, I think that unpredictability of not knowing exactly what you're going to get on the paper is one of the joys of painting in watercolour, so I embrace it. If it annoys you and it's hindering the way you paint, then let me show you a simple solution you can use to try to stop it from happening so much. I've got this little flower-shaped mixing palette here, and it's got tiny little compartments in each of the petals. So in order to stop the paint from separating so much, instead of using a large mixing tray or plate, try using a little palette like this, where the puddle of paint will be more contained and it won't be able to spread out as much. So this is burnt sienna that I've got on my brush now. I've just put the French Ultramarine in there. And now I'm just mixing the two colours together with my brush. Now I'll just have a quick look at my colour, just to make sure it's what I want. Okay, it's a bit blue, but it'll do for what I want to show you here. So I'm just going to let that puddle of paint just sit for a little while, just to see what happens to it. So I've waited about 20 minutes and I've come back. I haven't touched it. I'm just going to dab my brush in there and pick up the paint and see what colour it is. Okay, so looking at that, it's only slightly different to that first colour that I put there. It looks a bit warmer. So I'm just going to let that dry and see what it looks like when it's dry. Okay, so they're both dry now, and there's only a very, very slight variation there. There's nothing too noticeable. So I just want to mix that up again just with my brush quickly, just to see if that makes a difference. And it's back to the slightly bluer colour there. So I'm just going to let that dry and I'll have a look at it again when it's dry. So there's the three colours that have dried, and as you can see there's not a great deal of difference. So the difference between the two mixing palettes is the one on the left just helps to contain the paint into a smaller puddle, whereas the paint puddle on the palette on the right is able to spread out more, causing the paint to separate further. So if that fails, you could also try painting with some of those pre-mixed greys that you can buy. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's take a look at this little wallaby and see how I created the texture on the fur. I'm painting on Arches hot pressed watercolour paper here, and I've just wet the wallaby's head with water, and I've taken it down the neck and down the arm on the left hand side. Now I've got my grey paint that I just mixed up, and I'm just dabbing it onto the damp paper. So I'm just using my brush and I'm tapping it onto the surface so that I can start to create some texture with the paint. I'm going to leave some white paper showing. I'm not going to completely cover the paper with this grey paint. And I'm also going to drop in some other colours. So here I've dropped in some burnt sienna and it's blended with the grey. And now I've got some sepia on my brush and I'm just dotting that over the top of the burnt sienna. So I still want to see the burnt sienna, I don't want to completely cover it. But I'm just trying to create the texture that I see on the fur. And later on, when the paint's dry, I glaze some other colours over the top. I've just worked my way down the arm. Now I'm painting in the paw. This is sepia that I've got on my brush. It's not too dark at this stage. I just want to put it on a bit lighter and then I will darken it later. And I'm still working on the damp paper here. I'm just going to use a smaller brush. This is a Vinci Maestro Series 35 and this is a 00. Just a little liner brush. Now before, when I put the sepia on the paper, I was using the watery sepia, but now I want darker pigment, so I'll just wipe my brush over the pigment at the top there. And then when I put that on the paper, it just darkens that area there, because I've got quite a lot of pigment on my brush. The brush is damp, the paper's damp, and that colour just bleeds into that area. And I just push it up with my brush. Okay, I've done quite a bit more. Now I'm just working down onto the leg. So I'm just wetting this area. So once all that area is wet, again I just pick up my grey paint. I do the same thing that I did on the head. I just dab the paint on. I try and leave some areas of white paper showing. I don't want to completely cover it. And I'm just trying to paint the texture of the fur with my brush. Here I've got some Winsor Violet and I'm just dropping it onto that grey paint just to add interest to it. And I do the same thing with burnt sienna. So I'm just mixing the colours on the paper, not on the palette here. Just working wet on wet. And now I've got some sepia on my brush. I'm just using that to blend with the other colours. So here I'm working on dry paper. I'm just adding some detail to the head. I've got a small amount of lamp black on my brush. My brush is damp. I'm just brushing that over the dry paper. a little bit of paint here goes a long way. So I'm just deepening the colour and just adding detail with this. Now down here on the leg, I've got some watery burnt sienna. Just washing that over the top of the dry paper just to change the colour. This just adds a brown, warmish tinge to the fur. You can still see that texture showing through, I'm not hiding it. I'm just changing the colour and warming the wallaby up. So now I've just got water on my brush and I can soften away those paint edges. I'll do the same thing up here. Just watery burnt sienna onto the dry paper. Now I don't want to completely lose that purpley grey colour. So I just put it on and then I wash the paint out of my brush. And I use my damp brush just to soften away that hard paint edge. The full-length tutorial of this painting will be available on Patreon very soon. Patrons will have access to the line drawing, the reference photo, and my finished painting. While we are on an Aussie animal theme, I've also recently added this koala as a tutorial on Patreon. So that's available now. Thank you for watching. I hope this was useful to you. If it was, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that little bell to get notified each time I post a new tutorial. Let me know in the comments what colours you use to mix your greys. Okay, happy painting, and I'll see you soon.